of the one who gave it all. I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrendered all. I am is yours.
Oh, I'll stand,
and I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned in awe of the one who gave it all. I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrendered all. I am is yours.
And I'll stand,
I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned in awe of the one who gave it all. And I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrendered all. I am is yours. I'll stand with arms high and heart abandoned in awe of the one who gave it all. I'll stand, my soul, Lord, to you surrendered all. I am is yours. All I am is yours. All I am is yours. This is my prayer in the desert, when all that's within me feels dry. This is my prayer in my hunger and need. My God is the God who provides. This is my prayer in the fire, in weakness or trial or pain. There is a faith proved of more worth than gold. So refine me, Lord, through the flame. And I will bring praise, I will bring praise. No weapon formed against me shall remain. I will rejoice, I will declare, God is my victory and He is here. This is my prayer in the battle, when triumph is still on its way. I am a conqueror and co-heir with Christ, so firm on His promise I'll stand.
Go against her for battle. Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You are greatly despised. The arrogance of your heart has deceived you. You who live in the clefts of the rock, in the loftiness of your dwelling place, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to earth? Though you build high like an eagle, though you set your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. If thieves came to you, if robbers by night, oh, how you would be ruined. Would they not steal only until they had enough? If grape gatherers came to you, would they not leave some gleanings? Oh, how Esau will be ransacked and his hidden treasure searched out. All the men allied with you will send you forth to the border, and the men at peace with you will deceive you and overpower you. They who eat your bread will set an ambush for you. There is no understanding in him. Verse 8. Will I not on that day, declares the Lord, destroy wise men from Edom and understanding from the mountain of Esau? Then your mighty men will be dismayed, O Teman, so that everyone may be cut off from the mountains of Esau by slaughter. Because of violence to your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame, and you will be cut off forever. On the day that you stood aloof, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered his gates, and cast lots for Jerusalem, you too were as one of them. Do not gloat over your brother's day, the day of his misfortune, and do not rejoice over the sons of Judah in the day of their destruction. Yes, do not boast in the day of their distress. Verse 13. Do not enter the gate of my people in the day of their disaster. Yes, you do not gloat over their calamity in the day of their disaster, and do not loot their wealth in the day of their disaster. Do not stand at the fork of the road to cut down their fugitives, and do not imprison their survivors in the day of their distress. Verse 15, for the day of the Lord draws near on all the nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your dealings will return on your own head. Because just as you drank on my holy mountain, all the nations will drink continually. They will drink and swallow and become as if they had never existed. But on Mount Zion there will be those who escape, and it will be holy, and the house of Jacob will possess their possessions. Then the house of Jacob will be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, but the house of Esau will be a stubble, and they will set them on fire and consume them, so that there will be no survivor of the house of Esau. And I have this interesting PowerPoint I was going to do, but I didn't have a way to get this to the PowerPoint, so PowerPoint went to the side, and this is what we're doing. If you've never seen some of the possession that Edom had, the Edomites, have you ever heard of a city called Petra? Okay, has anybody seen the third Indiana Jones movie? Do you remember? So for those that have, there's a scene where they're riding on horses with Sean Connery, and they come up to this big old rock face, and it's just this these columns that are chiseled into the rock, and there's a little doorway, and it looks impressive. Most people thought that was some type of CGI. It's not. That's the face of Petra. It's a real city. You can actually go see it today. You can go take tours of this area. It's really impressive. That's what God gave to Esau. So let's turn over to Joshua chapter 24. I know it's in my Bible somewhere. Verse 4. So Joshua records basically all the division of the land that God gave to the Israelites. And in verse 4 it says, to Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau, and to Esau I gave Mount Seir to possess it, but Jacob and his sons went down to Egypt. So when the Israelites were going down to Egypt, God had already given, or was in the process of giving, Esau his land to possess. The Israelites wait 400 plus years. Then they have to come up to the land. Then they have to do all the conquering, which they did a really poor job of, to get their land. So if that's all you knew about the Bible, who would you say was more blessed, Jacob or Esau? Esau. He had his land, his possession, 400 years earlier than Jacob's promise. So then if that's where we stopped, well, then we're just going to go away. So now let's flip over to the reason to go through all this is Romans chapter 9, verse 13. That's in the New Testament. Romans chapter 9, verse 13. It says, just as it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. Does anybody know where that quote is from? Earl should know. I'll put him on the spot. It's from an Old Testament book that you did not teach. Don't worry. We'll get to it. So, Romans records that God says, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. Now that's one of those verses that sometimes trips up new Christians, sometimes older Christians. How do we resolve that statement that God made back in Malachi, by the way? Malachi chapter 1 is where God said, Jacob I loved and Esau I hated. If we just saw that just based on land possession, number of children, time of that, Esau was more blessed than Jacob. So how can it the Bible record, how can God say, Jacob I loved, Esau I hated? Okay, because of who the Lord loves, he disciplines. And we don't see a whole lot of discipline of Esau like we do the Israelites. Another option. How do we understand the word hated? Say that again, Ron? Love less. Is that how we understand hated? When I hate something, do I love it less? Oh yeah, but we're going to go to an extreme. It's not just a lot less, it's usually active. If I hate something, I'm going to try to do something against it. I'm going to be active with my dislike or active. So when we hate pizza, I pick something nobody hates. When we hate pizza, would you ever eat pizza? No, you wouldn't. I mean, you're active when somebody offers you that piece of pizza and you hate pizza, you don't go, oh, okay. I mean, I'm one of those guys that 10 years ago, I would have been really staunch on this, and I hated tomatoes. But my wife and some friends of ours, I won't mention Mary, have kind of whittled me down, and I'll eat tomatoes every now and then. I no longer hate tomatoes. I'll eat tomatoes. Okay. So what does it mean when God records Jacob I loved and Esau I hated? The hatred is a word that's translated from the original language, and they try to make it kind of balanced because the Hebrew balances, but in reality it's God loved Jacob actively. God did not love Esau actively. So whose life do we see God interacting with throughout? We see him going through this line right here. God is completely and totally active in the Israelites' lives. He is actively disciplining them. He is actively and intentionally blessing them when they come out of Israel in the book of Deuteronomy. He has them stand on one side of the mountain, has them stand on the other side of the mountain. These guys name the blessings. These guys name the curses. You follow the law, you get this. You break the law, you get that. It's active. God is involved in their lives intimately. What about Esau? He just doesn't really, in the same way, become actively involved in Esau's life. But he's there, right? God and Esau could have had a very good relationship, which brings us to us today. Is God active in everybody's life? Well, he's more active in some people and less active in others. Correct? Because the rain falls on both the righteous and the unrighteous. God is active. Now, what are we doing for our part? The Israelites were given blessings. Now, it's interesting how their blessings got flipped. And I asked the question, why did God pick Jacob over Esau? And the answer, of course, is Deuteronomy 29:29. We don't know. We don't have a verse we can go to and say, God says, I picked Jacob because. What we know is God picked Jacob. Now, we also know, even in today's day and age, if you have more than one child, that means you're going to have an older child and a younger child. Does the older child get any special treatment? Yes. Just by the default that they are older. Typically, don't look at Matthias and Tabitha, typically the oldest will learn to drive first. Typically the oldest will get a job first. Typically the oldest will get more responsibility first. And it's not because the parents love them more, it's because they're older. And that's it. So how much older was Esau than Jacob? Yeah, they were twins. We sometimes forget that. So it wasn't like there was 5 years between the two. So why was Esau older than Jacob? He just was a little quicker out the womb. So we might say he was quicker off the blocks. And God, knowing that, said, you know what? He is going to serve him, even though the difference in age is minutes. By law, Esau should have had all of the blessings. So, Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. Would be better understood, Jacob I positively, actively loved. Esau was a passive love. I was not active in his life. And not for anything that God did or didn't do, because as we've seen, Esau was blessed. God was taking care of Esau, just like he took care of Ishmael. Because we remember the story of Ishmael and Hagar, where Hagar left the first time after being kicked out of the family, and God says, no, go back. Second time they get kicked out of the family, God says, you know what? I'll take care of you. Ishmael is a child of Abraham, who is the guy I selected for reasons known only to God, but I will bless him. And he had as many children as Jacob did. Which, if we go back one level, because these two guys are brothers, half-brothers, and if we did the same type of looking, who was more blessed, Ishmael or Isaac? How many kids did Isaac have? The 2. How many kids did Ishmael have? 12. Who got to possess the land? I'll give you one guess. Before the other did. Because we know Jacob and Israel didn't get their land for a long time. Ishmael had his area pretty much at that time. He got to conquer his land. So if we look at it just by the physical blessings, Israel's at the bottom of the pile. Ishmael got more. Now that we can go over and talk about Lot. Now, Lot was just the nephew of Abram. He was the son of Nahor, who had a daughter that eventually Isaac is going to marry. Lot had some unique blessings. Because Abraham, when they got to the point where there were too much wealth between them, they had too many herdsmen, Abraham said what to Lot? Pick which way you want to go. I will be the bigger man, and you pick the north, I'll go to the south. You pick the south, I'll go to the north. You pick east, I'll go west, whatever. He allowed Lot to pick what Lot picked because of his wealth. Then Lot, for whatever reason, ends up in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then we see that whole scenario pan out, and then certain things happen. And then he has the 2 sons, and we end up with 2 nations from him. Lot got 2 nations. How many nations did Abraham end up with through his line? Well, just 1. So again, if you look at it that way, who was more blessed? Well, Lot was. Go ahead. The Moabites and the Ammonites. Yeah, but of the promise, he only got 1. He is only remembered as an Israelite. We can talk about, if you want, but I don't, some other guy that 400 years after all of this happened, well, he decides to rewrite history. Okay, so through that, if you look at just Abraham and then Lot, Lot gets those 2 nations and gets credit for both of those nations. We don't read about the Ishmaelites coming from Abraham. We don't read about Edomites coming from Abraham. The only ones that trace back to in the Bible is Israel to Abraham. So again, if we just look at the blessings, Israelite, again, is at the bottom of the pile. Go ahead, Mary. Oh, yes, and that's what I'm trying to look at, is because we typically view things through our own eyes, and we don't look at them as the way God looks at them, is why I'm going back to that Romans verse where Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. If we look at that with our eyes, and then we look at this with our eyes, that verse is lying. Because God loved Esau. Look at how he got all of his blessings. Look how he got all of his stuff. And Israel, Jacob didn't get his for hundreds of years later. But as you pointed out, God disciplines those he loves.
Well, and you look at the nations of the Ishmaelites and the Edomites and the Moabites, and because they are not disciplined, they don't follow God.
Right. So what Mary's saying is because these nations were not disciplined, they don't follow God, look at what happens to them, which is a nice segue to the book of Obadiah. And so now we see in the book of Obadiah, it is a condemnation against Esau and his descendants. So when we first look at Obadiah and we start looking at it, we're like, where is all this coming from? So if you were just to sit down with the Bible today and you started reading it and you get to this little book, this little itty-bitty tiny book, smallest book of the Old Testament, and you read it, it'd be like, wait a second, something's not quite matching up. Because if you were taking notes and you're looking at it, your teacher's discussing it, and you get something like this and you realize, wait a second, Esau was more blessed than Israel. Why would God call down this kind of condemnation on the Edomites? Well, God explains it in the book. God's going to take the time to go through it and explain in those 21 verses what is going on. So, what went wrong here with Jacob and Esau? They're brothers. Parents had favorite children. Michelle? Deception. Let's see. What is Jacob's name? Isaac is the one who laughs. Jacob's name means what? What was that? Usurper. Okay. So we see right at the beginning we have Rebekah, and we have Rebekah loving Jacob, Isaac loving Esau, and then all of a sudden there's some bad blood. I mean, again, they're only minutes apart. You would think the parents would treat them basically the same. But the parents don't. So, do you think Isaac had any baggage that he passed on to his kids? What was one of those big events that happened in What was one of those big events that happened in Isaac's life? I could call on people if you like. Okay. Anybody? Sacrificed. Isaac was the only person that God ever requested that they be sacrificed on an altar to him. You think that maybe did anything to Isaac's thinking? I mean, your dad and a couple of servants are walking along. We're going to go make a sacrifice. It's 3 days from here. Isaac's like, oh, okay. We don't know how old Isaac was. It's interesting. One of the guys, well, there's a whole group that believe Isaac was 37 when God went to, or when Abraham was taking him to the sacrifice. This is the same group that believe that Isaac was 40 and Rebekah was 3 when they got married. It's the way they do the math. Math is important, Linda. Make sure Raina knows that. Raina, math is important. So they got the math all messed up just the way they read it. So I believe Isaac was much younger than that. He was a lad. He was a young person. So he's being tagged along with a couple other guys. They're going to go do sacrifice. They get closer, and Abraham says, you guys stay here. I'm going to take my son and the wood. We're going to go up a little bit further. Isaac happens to look around. It's like, hey, Dad, where's the sacrifice? Abraham, being the smart guy he is, God will provide. Now, Abraham already knows what God has said. Go sacrifice your son. So Abraham already knew what he was going to do, but being the smart dad, he's like, oh, God will take care of it. I think that's probably what I would have said. They get closer to it. He starts tying up Isaac, puts him on the altar. Do you think Isaac now knows what's going on? He's got the knife raised, and God says, okay, stop. Look over there to your left, and there's a ram. Offer that up. I now know that you're not going to hold your only son. And so God and I can only imagine what was going through Isaac's head. Okay, so now, years later, Isaac has two sons of his own, Jacob and Esau. Esau grows up a little bit more outdoorsy, or a lot more outdoorsy. And do you think Rebecca ever heard the story about what Dad did to me one time? Yeah. So I can see Rebecca being a mom thinking, God is going to ask my husband to do the same thing that he asked his dad to do, and he's going to sacrifice one of my boys. So Rebecca's thinking, now this is all supposition as to why they ended up the way they did. So you can see that there's some problems here that stemmed from our way of thinking. When we think that Israel was blessed at the bottom of the barrel using our thinking, then we get messed up. So do we understand why God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac? We can understand that, and that it not only proved to God, which God already knew because God knows everything, but it also proved to Abraham that he was willing to trust God. And then that's used throughout Scripture of why Abraham was such a great man of faith. Do we trust God? And a lot of us will say, yeah, we trust God, yeah, we trust God. And then all of a sudden, well, sorry, God, I am not doing that. Now, God, I don't think, speaks to us directly in that way. God does not come down and go, Rick, get up. And see, he didn't even get up. I mean, how much more clearer could I have been? Okay, I'm not God. So, but there are stuff that we know that goes on in our life that's like when we're driving and we see somebody that we think needs some help. You're at a restaurant and you see somebody crying, and there's something that niggles in the back of your head about just go pat them on the back. Just go say, God loves you. Go something. There's something going that you know you should do, but then you think about what the world thinks about. Oh, if I go over and talk to her, she'll think I'm flirting with her, and then this, and all of a sudden I'm in jail. Because that's what the world teaches men. That we cannot talk to women. You cannot do anything because it's going to blow up in our face. Okay? And then women, you can't talk to a man because as soon as you talk to a man, the man's going to think you're flirting, and all of a sudden you're in the house, and it all blows up in your face. That's what the world is teaching us. I think that's what the world has always taught. But that's not how God thinks. God's like, I see that person, one of my children, hurting, go comfort them in some small way, and we ignore it. Now, that's just one example. We could pick up bigger examples. How many of us have ever been called to go do mission work, and yet we're all still sitting here? Or maybe we went and came back. So it got difficult. It got hard. We went to do some type of work, and we're like, okay, that's enough for me. I'm going to go back to my AC. Jacob and Esau would have known about what happened to Isaac, would have known what God told Abraham when God came to Abraham and said, get up, take your possessions, and go to a land I'm going to show you. At that time, Abram did not even know where he was going. He just had to get up, start packing, and God's going to let him know on the way. How many of us would be willing to do that? To just take that leap of, I won't say faith, but that leap of following God. Yes, Michelle? Oh, okay. It was hypothetical. It was a rhetorical question. So, we get down to that third generation, Jacob and Esau. Now, which one of them, based on what we know, which one of them might, and again, this is speculation, which one of them might have been willing to sacrifice one of their sons? Jacob or Esau? Who said Esau? You think? Why? But do you think because he's a manly man that he wanted to keep his sons? And if God said, sacrifice one of your sons, Esau's like, no, these are my sons. Right, so we can kind of... see, and I guess from my point of view is Jacob would have. Because Jacob was more willing to follow God. If God would have given the instruction, Jacob, I believe, would have followed it. We see Jacob wrestling with God later on in his life. And what did Esau do with his life? He wanted to tick off. He wanted to make his parents unhappy. So what did he do? He goes and marries 2 Canaanite women and then an Ishmaelite, just to make them unhappy. Because he knew it would displease his parents. Not because he loved the women, but because he knew that it would make mom and dad unhappy. So was Esau about pleasing his parents? Where at least Jacob, when his parents said, hey, by the way, Jacob, you get on a saddle on a donkey and you go 300 miles away, 400 miles away, and you find a bride. Because we want you to marry from the family. We don't want you to do like Esau. And what did Jacob do? He went, oh, okay. Now, we could count that up as one of two things. It's because he was a wuss. He was a mama's boy. He didn't have any backbone, and he just always did what his parents say. Or we can look at it from he was obedient to do what his parents said. And sometimes obedience is looked at in the wrong light. We don't always think of obedience as being somebody that is in charge because they're obedient. And obedience automatically means that they're a whipped dog. So we can make the argument both ways, but looking at it from a point of view in this class, it's more likely, I would say, that Jacob would have followed what God had said, because that seems to have been his nature. Now, God picked Jacob again, and we don't necessarily know why. It wasn't because God picked Jacob because Jacob was special, because, well, Jacob was special, but maybe not in anything religiously, but God picked Jacob. God loved Esau, and God loved Jacob, but his love to Jacob was very active. He was involved in his life because God chose to be in his life. Now, in the last few minutes of class, how does that apply to us today? Go ahead, Mary. So what Mary said is, if Jacob and Esau, Rebekah and Isaac, they didn't have favorite children, if they didn't have favorites, how might that have turned out differently? But we all have baggage, we all have issues, and we can choose what we do with those issues. Do we go to God or do we leave God? And that's our choice. So every one of us in here has some sort of trauma, some sort of problem, some sort of challenge from, I think I was talking to my wife about it, that they are correlating that our birth had, the trauma in our birth, was that you telling me about your reading? Go ahead, how did that go? Okay, so what they were, the doctors, the world is telling us, or what they're theorizing, is that the trauma that goes through when we're inside our mom's womb, and then the birth process is causing anxiety, is causing this. If it was a nice, easy birth, then you've got an easy, laid-back child. And then if it was traumatic and your spine got twisted, your leg was lifted to your right or whatever, you end up with back problems, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, that's what we're discovering. So, but we still, when we get to an age, we still get to do what? We still get to choose. Regardless of what happened 5 months, 5 years, 5 decades ago, it's still our choice today. And that's the same thing that Peter said, getting mixed up, when Joshua says in chapter 24, choose for yourself who you will worship. As for me and my house, we're going to go with God. And we know Joshua had been through all kinds of a mess. I mean, working with Moses and then working with the Israelites and the whole golden calf and walking through the Dead Sea, Red Sea, whichever one they crossed, watching the death of the firstborns. I mean, all of that. And yet he still says, as for me and my house, I'm going to worship God. It comes down to we choose, and we don't choose 20 years ago. And then it's like the old guy said to his wife after the wife says to the man, you never said you loved me. And he says, well, when we got married, I said I love you. If I change my mind, I'll let you know. Okay, well, a lot of guys think that's funny. Most women will start to weep. I mean, God tells us every day he loves us. You talk to people that have a certain aspect of life, the fact that they get to open their eyes in the morning, God loves you. And now after that, well, that's life. As I try to crawl out of bed and my back cracks and my knees pop and I barely stand up, I got to get the walker. I mean, whatever it is, but God loves you, you still got up. And we can view that way. Or we can wake up and go, oh, another day. It's our choice. And we get to pick. What's interesting then, also as Christians, is when we look at other people, and we say, well, they got more than I do. God loves them more. What does this little story, this map, teach us about possessions, about physical blessings? It's not there. I mean, God disciplines those he loves. And it's like I explained to one time in one of the younger classes, is if God gives this student right here a job and they make $10 an hour, and then he gives this student over here, when they get a job and they get $100 an hour, what does God expect from both of them? He expects them to take the blessings he's given them and share. He expects him to take the blessings he's given them and share. When you've got $100 to share and you've got $10 to share, who's got the tougher choice? Just again, based on the world. The guy with $100. Because he's got 100 blessings. This guy's got 10 blessings. He only has to figure out how to share 10 of them. This guy's got to figure out how to share 100 of them. And who does he give his 100 blessings to? Can he give all 100 to one person? Well, he can, but then why didn't God do that in the first place? God could have easily given that person the 100. So God's given you that 100. You have to use a little discernment. Go ahead, Rick, Lynette, leave my class. I know you're upset. That's fine. Greeting, I know. So he's given these guys the 100 blessings. Now they have to use the wisdom that God has given them to try to figure out how to use those blessings to do what for God? To glorify God, to further God's kingdom. But so often we take the blessings that are given to us and we use them for ourselves. We figure, hey, God gave them to me, I get to use it. That's the way God works. But God is trying to work with us, and the blessings that God gave Ishmael, Ishmael could have done great things with them. But we see, and it's recorded, he didn't. Esau could have done great things with the blessings. When the Israelites came out of Egypt and were going up to the promised land, they could have very easily said, yeah, go through our country, we'll protect you, your family. But they didn't say that. They said, no, 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 this is what God gave me, this is my possession, you go around. You don't even set a foot on my property because God gave it to me. And then that's what they did. So now the Israelites, instead of having a short trek, had to have this long trek around Edom to get to the promised land. So that's the backstory to what we're about to read in Obadiah. It'll probably be a couple weeks before we get to the second verse. So this is the vision of Obadiah. Okay, any last chance for a question? Last chance for an answer. Deuteronomy 29:29. There, we're good. Okay, thank you.